Ever get that feeling like someone's watching you?
Mm,
Yeah.
me too.
We might laugh about putting those sticky notes over our webcams, but... Well, today's deep dive is going to make you wonder if that's such a crazy idea after all. We're going deep into government surveillance. And our guide for this is a pretty interesting article from SpySat News. You know that website, it's all about GPS technology and the kind of tracking that. Well, most people don't even realize is happening every single day.
Yeah.
Their article is called A Critical Analysis of Government Surveillance Programs. And it doesn't mess around.
Yeah, they get right into it.
It digs deep into the hows and the whys of this whole surveillance game.
You know what I think is so interesting about this whole thing is spying by governments, it's not new.
Right.
We've got, centuries of cloak and dagger stories, right? Hidden microphones. The works. But this article, it really highlights how modern technology, it totally transformed this whole game. Just think about it. Back in the day, tapping a phone line, that was a big deal. Now, data is being collected on us constantly, whether we're online or not.
So no more stakeouts, just data centers.
Exactly. And that brings us to a prime example, the NSA's PRISM program. So imagine you're doing some late night online shopping. You're checking out those shoes you've had your eye on, right?
Oh, yeah?
PRISM means that data, along with potentially millions of others, it's accessible to the NSA.
See,
that's the kind of scale.
That makes it way more real than just like hearing the name PRISM. But why? Why would the government even need that much information?
It all boils down to this, the security versus privacy debate. Governments argue that in a world with very real threats, right, they need access to this data to connect the dots, to identify potential dangers before they, before they escalate. Think of it like a giant puzzle.
Okay.
They're trying to piece together these tiny bits of information just to try to see the bigger picture.
Okay, I get that. But where do we draw the line? It can't just be a free-for-all.
Right.
The article mentions a lot of pushback against these programs like PRISM, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Critics argue that this level of surveillance, it's a slippery slope,
Right.
that it infringes on basic freedoms.
Yeah.
Creates a climate of fear. And it might not even be effective in preventing actual crimes or attacks. Plus, there's always that risk of misuse.
Yeah.
Who's watching the watchers.
Right.
All of that.
That's what makes this whole discussion so tricky. It's not just about whether surveillance is happening, but is it justified? And what are the consequences for all of us? Which brings us to a name you can't ignore in any conversation about surveillance. Edward Snowden.
Snowden's 2013 revelations. Oh, man, they were like a bombshell,
Right.
Suddenly, this whole surveillance debate wasn't some abstract thing anymore. It was real.
Right.
The article, it really digs into how it all went down. Snowden, he didn't just reveal that the NSA was collecting phone records. He exposed the sophisticated systems they had built to gather and analyze this data, and on a massive scale.
Really makes you think twice about that whole nothing to hide, nothing to fear argument,
Right.
Because if the government has access to this much information,
Mm-hmm.
Who decides what's suspicious and what's not?
That is the million-dollar question,
Right.
and it's one that we're still debating today.
Right.
The article, it highlights how Snowden's actions, they had this ripple effect across the world. It sparked all these conversations about government transparency and the right to privacy in this digital age. It forced governments and tech companies to really rethink their approach to data security and surveillance.
So Snowden, he really changed the game.
Right.
But it's not like people just gave up on privacy, right?
Right.
The article mentions this arms race when it comes to technology.
Exactly.
What's that all about?
So Snowden's revelations, they were like this wake-up call, right?
Yeah.
People started looking for ways to protect their data, and that's where encryption comes in.
Okay.
Think of it like putting a digital lock on all your information. The article does a good job of explaining how it works, but it's really quite clever. It scrambles your data so that only someone with the right key can unlock it.
Okay, so that makes sense for like messages and emails, but what about all the other ways that we're being tracked online?
Well, that's where VPNs come in.
VPNs, okay.
Yeah. Imagine you're walking down a busy street, but instead of being out in the open, you're using this secret network of tunnels and hidden pathways. That's essentially what a VPN does.
Oh, wow.
It routes your internet traffic through a secure server, which makes it much harder for anyone to track your online activity or your location.
Okay. So I'm starting to feel a little bit better about all this. But if we have all these tools to protect ourselves, why are governments still so concerned about encryption?
Well, because it creates a dilemma for them, right?
Okay.
On the one hand, they want to keep us safe, and that often means being able to access information to investigate threats. But on the other hand, strong encryption makes it much harder to track criminals or terrorists. The article talks about how governments are pushing for backdoors in encryption software.
Backdoors? What's that?
Yeah, so basically it's a way to bypass the lock,
Oh,
even if it means potentially weakening security for everyone.
so it's like giving the government a master key to everyone's houses, just in case they need to get in.
Kind of, yeah.
That seems a little bit.
Yeah, it is risky. And the article really highlights, the potential dangers of giving governments too much power. It raises concerns about how these surveillance technologies, how they could be used to stifle dissent, to target political opponents,
Yeah.
or even control entire populations.
Okay, now I'm starting to feel that chill down my spine again.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? Is it even possible to have both security and freedom in a digital age?
Hmm.
So we're at this crossroads, right?
Yeah.
We all want to feel safe, but not if it means giving up our freedom. So how do we even begin to sort all this out?
Well, that is the big question, isn't it? The article, it doesn't really give us easy answers, but it does point out this powerful tool that we all have, awareness. The more we understand how these systems work, who has access to our data and what's really at stake, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
Okay. So we don't have to throw our phones in the ocean and live off the grid.
Well, not necessarily.
Right.
It's more about just being mindful. Every time you click accept all cookies or download a new app, you're making a choice about your digital footprint.
Right. It's
It's like leaving this trail of breadcrumbs online. The question is, how long do we want that trail to be?
right. And what about, for those of us who aren't tech wizards, what are some practical things we can do to protect ourselves?
Oh, there are tons of things, actually. The article mentions a few practical steps, Strong passwords, for one. And don't just think, password 123. Think more like a passphrase,
Right.
A whole sentence that's easy for you to remember, but almost impossible for anyone else to guess. And then there's two-factor authentication. It just adds that extra layer of security.
Right.
I know it might seem like kind of a pain,
Yeah.
but honestly, it's a small price to pay for peace of mind.
Right. Okay. Those are pretty doable. Anything else?
Yeah. Be careful about what you share online, obviously. Once
Right.
once something's out there, it can be really hard to control. And then, whenever you can, try to choose privacy-focused services, ones that are really transparent about their data collection practices.
Yeah. Like the article said, knowledge is power. The more we know, the better choices we can make.
100%. This deep dive, it's really just a starting point.
Right.
There is so much information out there about digital privacy and security.
Right.
And the more we can educate ourselves, the better we can navigate this. Honestly, it's a complex landscape.
Yeah.
And advocate for a future where security and freedom, they're not this either proposition.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. We started with a sticky note over a webcam, and now I'm questioning every click I make online.
And you know what? Yeah, that's a good thing. It means you're asking the right questions.
Okay.
Because technology is constantly changing.
Right.
The most important thing we can all do is stay informed, stay engaged, and just never stop questioning the trade-offs we're being asked to make.
So next time you see a news story about, a data breach or the government, doing more surveillance stuff, don't just keep scrolling. Take a moment, learn about it, try to understand it, and ask yourself, what does this mean for me? And what kind of digital world do I really want to live in? That's all for today's deep dive. We'll leave you with that thought.